Chapter 19 of the Circular Staircase. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ana Sofia Simão de Portugal. The Circular Staircase by Mary Roberts Rinehart. Chapter 19 Concerning Thomas. "Mr. Jameson," I said, when we found ourselves alone after dinner that night, "the inquest yesterday seemed to me the merest recapitulation of things that were already known. It developed nothing new beyond the story of Dr. Stewart's, and that was volunteered." "An inquest is only a necessary formality, Miss Innes," he replied. "Unless a crime is committed in the open, the inquest does nothing beyond getting evidence from witnesses while events are still in their minds. The police steps in later. You and I both know how many important things never transpired. For instance, that man had no key, and yet Miss Gertrude testified to a fumbling at the lock, and then the opening of the door. The piece of evidence you mention, Dr. Stewart's story, is one of those things we have to take cautiously. The doctor has a patient who wears black and does not raise her veil. Why, it is a typical mysterious lady. Then the good doctor comes across Arnold Armstrong, who was a graceless scamp. Mortui, what's the rest of it? And he is quarrelling with the lady in black. Behold, says the doctor, they are one and the same." "Why was Mr. Bailey not present at the inquest?" The detective's expression was peculiar. "Because his physician testified that he is ill and unable to leave his bed." "Ill!" I exclaimed. "Why, neither Elsie nor Gertrude has told me that." "There are more things than that, Miss Innes, that are puzzling. Bailey gives the impression that he knew nothing of the crash at the bank until he read it in the paper Monday night, and that he went back and surrendered himself immediately. I do not believe it. Jonas, the watchman at the Traders' Bank, tells a different story. He says that on the Thursday night before, about 8:30, Bailey went back to the bank. Jonas admitted him, and he says the cashier was in a state almost of collapse. Bailey worked until midnight, then he closed the vault and went away. The occurrence was so unusual that the watchman pondered over it and the rest of the night." "What did Bailey do when he went back to the Knickerbocker Apartments that night?" "He packed the suitcase ready for instant departure." "But he held off too long. He waited for something. My personal opinion is that he waited to see Miss Gertrude before flying from the country. Then, when he had shot down Arnold Armstrong that night, he had to choose between two evils. He did things that would immediately turn public opinion in his favor, and surrendered himself as an innocent man. The strongest thing against him is his preparation for flight, and his deciding to come back after the murder of Arnold Armstrong. He was shrewd enough to disarm suspicion as to the graver charge." The evening dragged along slowly. Mrs. Watson came to my bedroom before I went to bed and asked if I had any arnica. She showed me a badly swollen hand with reddish streaks running towards the elbow. She said it was the hand she had hurt the night of the murder a week before, and that she had not slept well since. It looked to me as if it might be serious, and I told her to let Dr. Stewart see it. The next morning, Mrs. Watson went up to town on the 11 train and was admitted to the Charity Hospital. She was suffering from blood poisoning. I fully meant to go up and see her there, but other things drove her entirely from my mind. I telephoned to the hospital that day, however, and ordered a private room for her, and whatever comforts she might be allowed. Mrs. Armstrong arrived Monday evening with her husband's body, and services were set for the next day. The house on Chestnut Street, in town, had been opened, and Tuesday morning Louise left us to go home. She sent for me before she went, and I saw she had been crying. "How can I thank you, Miss Innes?" she said. "You have taken me on faith, and you have not asked me any questions. Some time, perhaps, I can tell you, and when that time comes, you will all despise me, Elsie too." I tried to tell her how glad I was to ever had her, but there was something else she wanted to say. She said it finally, when she had bade a constrained goodbye to Elsie and the car was waiting at the door. "Miss Innes," she said in a low tone, if there is any attempt made to have you give up the house, do it, if you possibly can. I am afraid to have you stay." That was all. Gertrude went into town with her and saw her safely home. She reported a decided coolness in the greeting between Louise and her mother, and that Dr. Walker was there, apparently in charge of the arrangements for the funeral. Elsie disappeared shortly after Louise left, and came home about 9 that night, muddy and tired. As for Thomas, he went around dejected and sad, and I saw the detective watching him closely at dinner. Even now I wonder, what did Thomas know? What did he suspect? At 10 o'clock the household had settled down for the night. Liddy, who was taking Mrs. Watson's place, had finished examining the tea towels and the corners of the shelves in the cooling room, and had gone to bed. Alex, the gardener, had gone heavily up the circular staircase to his room, and Mr. Jameson was examining the locks of the windows. Elsie dropped into a chair in the living room and stared moodily ahead. Once he aroused. "What sort of looking chap is that Walker, Gertrude?" he asked. "Rather tall, very dark, smooth-shaven, not bad looking," Gertrude said, putting down the book she had been pretending to read. Elsie kicked the taburet viciously. "Lovely place this village must be in the winter," he said irrelevantly. "A girl will be buried alive here." It was then someone rapped at the knocker on the heavy front door. Elsie got up leisurely and opened it, admitting Warner. He was out of breath from running, and he looked half abashed. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, "but I didn't know what else to do. It's about Thomas." "What about Thomas?" I asked. Mr. Jameson had come into the hall, and we all stared at Warner. "He's acting queer," Warner explained. "He's sitting down there on the edge of the porch, and he says he has seen a ghost. The old man looks bad, too. He can scarcely speak." "He's as full of superstition as an egg is of meat," I said. "Elsie, bring some whiskey, and we will all go down." No one moved to get the whiskey, from which I judged there were 3 pocket flasks ready for emergency. Gertrude threw a shawl around my shoulders, and we all started down over the hill. I had made so many nocturnal excursions around the place that I knew my way perfectly. But Thomas was not on the veranda, nor was he inside the house. The men exchanged significant glances, and Warner got a lantern. "He can't have gone far," he said. "He was trembling so that he couldn't stand when I left." Jameson and Elsie together made the round of the lodge, occasionally calling the old man by name. There was no response. No Thomas came, bowing and showing his white teeth through the darkness. I began to be vaguely uneasy for the first time. Gertrude, who was never nervous in the dark, went alone down the drive to the gate, and stood there looking along the yellowish line of the road while I waited on the tiny veranda. Warner was puzzled. He came around to the edge of the veranda and stood looking at it as if it ought to know and explain. "He might have stumbled into the house," he said, "but he could not have climbed the stairs. Anyhow, he's not inside or outside, that I can see." The other members of the party had come back now, and no one had found any trace of the old man. His pipe, still warm, rested on the edge of the rail, and inside on the table his old gray hat showed that its owner had not gone far. He was not far, after all. From the table my eyes traveled around the room and stopped at the door of a closet. I hardly know what impulse moved me, but I went in and turned the knob. It burst open with the impetus of a weight behind it, and something fell partly forward in a heap on the floor. It was Thomas. Thomas without a mark of injury on him, and dead. End of chapter 19.